and help you with proper coffee later. We've got some snobs among us, and apparently fancy coffee like Rick Coffee and Fresco, all fancy brands, not good enough for you, but we'll get the barista in a while. Okay, so I did prepare a PowerPoint. It would be quite actually great if Philip can help us to just go to the next slide, and to the next one, and to the next one, and to the next one. So what happened during this holiday, I listened to a podcast, and the podcast of a guy called Dave Rubin, the Rubin Report. He's a secular guy, and this is quite a famous podcast. Who's familiar with the Rubin Report? Just by a raise of hands, a couple of you. So this guy invited Bishop Barron, he's a Catholic bishop, and another guy, Rabbi Volp, who's a Jewish rabbi, to have a discussion with him. It sounds a bit like a joke because he's an atheist comedian. So a comedian, a rabbi, and a Catholic bishop walks into a room and they have a discussion. But it's actually a very, very good discussion. And they agree on a lot of things. And at one stage, Dave Rubin, the host, asks the rabbi, where do you disagree with this guy? You guys have been high-fiving each other, obviously picking on the atheists and whatever, but where do you agree or disagree with him? And he just said, the notion that God can be a man, or that man can be God somehow, is absolutely absurd. For a Jew, it doesn't make any sort of sense. So the PC nature of the discussion went a little bit south at that stage. And Rabbi Volk just said, look, it doesn't make any sense, I'm sorry. And to be fair to Rabbi Volk, he reads the Hebrew scriptures. You guys might know it as the Old Testament. And over and over and over again, it is sort of hammered into you that the Lord, your God, is one. Do not make any graven image of this. This comes from Deuteronomy 6 verse 4, if you don't believe me. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one. This is one of the most famous passages in the Bible. So to equate anything to God, anything human, and say that this thing is equal with God is absurd. It's false for the Jew. As a matter of fact, God is so distant within Judaism that the word that they use for God is Yahweh, and they use that word reluctantly. It's a little bit like a good version of Voldemort. Those of you who follow Harry Potter, it's a name that should not be named. Let's not go there. Don't use that name. That's how the Jews felt about God's name, because it is so holy. So when they used Yahweh, it was really just in case of emergency. They didn't want to use that name. And again, in Exodus 20, if you look at the Ten Commandments, do not make any graven image of God. Do not bow down, do not worship. And what is the claim of Christianity? That this Jesus was the image of God, and we must worship him as such. So you can understand how Rabbi Volk and Bishop Barron just cannot agree on that. Now, it's interesting, but the fact of the matter is that the first Christians, we think of them as Christians, but they were Jews. John, Peter, Andrew, Jesus, all of these names, oh yeah, the first Christians. Well, fair enough, but they were Jews. Not only were they Jews, they were hardcore monotheistic Jews. And they were the ones who became Christian. Now that is fascinating. Now, the reason why it's fascinating is, if you compare, let's say, Buddha to Jesus for a moment. Buddha's followers were all convinced that he is God. And they asked him a couple of times, what are you? And they tried to worship him, and he told them, it took him a lot of effort to tell them, guys, I'm not a God, okay? I'm not a God. And Buddha had to repeat that message quite a bit. But the interesting thing is that the Eastern people in which Buddha operated, in which Buddhism originated, within their worldview, it makes a lot of sense for man to be God, or for God to be man. It's not a big leap for them. So Buddha had to do a lot of work to tell them this is not the case. But within Judaism, it doesn't make any sense. So in the East, they had sort of a preconceived environment that made it possible for Buddha, this man, to be God. But within Israel, first century Judaism, very, very difficult. Yet, these first Christians, all monotheistic Jews, became Christians. And they believed that this person, this Jesus, was God in the flesh. He was God incarnate. Now, at this stage, we get into a lot of fights in terms of how to interpret the Bible, because Muslims will tell you that Jesus never says that I am God, Jehovah's Witnesses, and many other people would use this argument. And I do not want to get into that fist fight. I'm more interested in the implications of the incarnation, but I'm not necessarily interested in that fight. And because I'm not interested in that fight, and I know that you guys are interested in that fight, and you guys want to know a little bit more about it, I am outsourcing this to Daniel. Daniel is doing his PhD on this, and he's going to, you can come up, Daniel, and he's going to do an excellent job in about 6 minutes to try and argue for it. So this is just me getting somebody in to do my dirty work for me, and then I'll be back.
All right, thank you, Johan. I'll try to do a fantastic job. I can't promise anything though. I'm just going to take this out. So, Johan already gave a little background on the whole monotheistic concept. And if you go through the New Testament, you'll find a lot of explicit verses where Jesus is addressed as God. Okay? But what I'm going to try to do in the next 5.5 minutes is just to talk about Jesus' own claims to divinity, the claims that he made that he is God. Okay, so you can approach this, well, usually I think you can do it, you can look at the claims that he's making in a direct way, or you can look at the claims that he's making in a very indirect way. So we're going to look at one of each of these. So let's start with the indirect one. Now, if you go to the Gospel of Matthew, in Matthew 4, there's this famous scene where Jesus goes into the wilderness and he's tempted by the devil. Okay, and he goes through a couple of temptations, and then the last one, Satan takes Jesus onto a mountain or something, and he shows him all his kingdoms and everything, and he says, well, if you can have all of this if you bow down and worship me. And then Jesus responds with Deuteronomy 6. You must worship the Lord your God only. Okay? Only worship one God, the true living God. As a typical monotheistic Jew would answer this. I think there's two things that we can take from this. First of all, there's always some sort of connotation between bowing down or falling down in front of somebody and worshipping. Okay, if you go through the Bible, that's always, not always, but a lot of the times that goes hand in hand. You fall down and you worship. And then the second thing is that Jesus, like I just said, he's a Jew, and he says you only worship the one true God of heaven and earth. Now, keep that in the back of your mind. If you go to Acts 14, okay, you read about Paul and Barnabas, and they're in Lystra, and Paul heals this sick man, and then some of the Gentiles see this, and they say, well, this must be the gods who came down to visit us, and they start worshipping Paul and Barnabas. And then Paul and Barnabas is devastated by this act, and they tell them, no, we're not gods, we're not God, don't worship us. And they're so devastated by this that they tear their clothes afterwards. Okay, so that's one event that I think links to Jesus' answer to the Satan. And then the other one is in Revelation. So John, the Apostle John, meets this angel. Well, he meets a lot of angels in Revelation, but there's this one point where he meets one of them, and he falls down and starts worshipping the angel. And the angel responds by saying, don't worship me because I'm a creature. I'm not the creator, don't worship me. Okay, so that sort of, he's correcting John. Don't worship me, I'm just a creature. So with this as a bit of a background, if you go to Matthew 28, the same gospel that started with the temptation of Jesus in the wilderness, in Matthew 28, in two places, this is just before Jesus ascends into heaven and before he gives the Great Commission. His own disciples comes to him and they worship him. It explicitly says that they came to him and they started to worship him. And Jesus never corrects them. He never tells them, don't worship me, I'm just a creature. So that's, I think, an indirect claim to divinity from Jesus' side. Alright, now I don't know how my time is. I'm going to try to get as far as I can with a direct one. And this is in John 8. Now in John 8 there's this long dialogue with the Pharisees, like usually Jesus is talking with them, and like usual they are trying to corner Jesus in some sort of dilemma. And it's funny, at one point Jesus tells them that the Satan is your father. Now that has to be one of the top 10 things you don't want to hear from Jesus, right? That the Satan is your father. But in any case, it ends with this this stage when they say, oh, so you're claiming that you're better than our father Abraham, da da da. And Jesus says, truly, truly, I say to you, before Abraham was, I am. Before Abraham was, I am. Again, he's making a very huge claim. And then the very next verse says that the Jews started to pick up stones because they want to stone him. Now, one wonders why. Well, the point is that Jesus, when he says that before Abraham was, I am, he's echoing Exodus 3, where Yahweh, like Johan talked earlier about Yahweh, where Yahweh appears to Moses in the burning bush and tells Moses that I am who I am. So whatever Jesus is saying, it's got to be that, I think that he's claiming that whoever it is that spoke to Moses in the burning bush, I am one in essence with him. Whoever that was, I'm one in essence with him. That's the one thing that Jesus is claiming. The other thing is he's claiming an eternal nature. Before Abraham was, I am. Now it's interesting, if you go to Micah 5 verse 2, it's a prophecy about Jesus' birth in Bethlehem. And it talks about Bethlehem, this place, and there will come, out of Bethlehem, there will come a great leader of Israel, or a ruler of Israel. And then, just after that it says, but although this leader will be born in Bethlehem, its existence lies way back in immeasurable days. Days of immeasurable past, literally. That is the same phrase that's used of God in Habakkuk 1 verse 12, where Habakkuk asks this rhetorical question to God. He says, God, are you not an everlasting God? Are you not forever? It's exactly the same phrase. Are you not a God of immeasurable days, or a God of days of immeasurable past? It's exactly the same phrase that it uses there. So the point is, although Jesus was born in Bethlehem, his existence lies way back in days of immeasurable past. He's existed forever, and that is how the Gospel of John starts. In the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The small word was is like a continuous act, or a continuous act in the past, which is just a way of saying that whatever the Word is in John 1, it has no origin. It didn't start it to exist. And then later in verse 14 of John 1, the Word took on flesh and dwelt among us. So that's the short end of it. We just scratched the surface, but I think that's John 8, before Abraham was, that's a very direct claim from Jesus' side that he is divine. Thank you.
Well done, Daniel. We can give him a round of applause. He defended the divinity of Christ within 6 minutes. That's a new record. Well done, Daniel. Now, here's the thing. We are not the first group of people fighting about whether Jesus was divine or not. This is not the first time, and this is not the last time. In church history, there was an event that happened in the 4th century. You guys might have heard of the Council of Nicaea. The Council of Nicaea, made famous by Dan Brown for all the wrong reasons and all sorts of other bogus theories. But what happened there was interesting. There was a guy called Arian. Don't confuse him with Hitler. This was just his name, Arian. And Arian, that's not, he wasn't quite that tall, but not Arian, Arius. But he was a very famous figure in a town called Alexandria in Egypt. It's still there. It's now just a little bit less famous. But at that time in the Roman Empire, it was the culture. It was the hub of culture. It was the New York / London / the allure of the ancient world. A lot of intelligent people, I couldn't even say that with a straight face, a lot of really influential people debated ideas there. Jewish intellectuals, pagans, Christians, etc. And this guy, Arius, came to the fore and he became famous because he challenged the notion that Jesus was divine. The whole idea that Jesus is equal with God. He would have disagreed with what Daniel just said. And he became very famous, this Arius. And the church was in a bit of trouble because this happened at the same time that you have the Orthodox views, and they called the Council of Nicaea. And at the Council of Nicaea, Arius was called a heretic. And Arianism, the idea that God is not divine, was considered heretical. Now, it didn't end there, because Arius, intelligent guy, influential guy, part of the upper culture, high culture, the Arians, they managed to snuggle up to the then emperor of Rome, called Constantine. And at that stage, it looks like Arianism will become part of the discussion, and it's not heretical anymore. And at that time, a guy called Athanasius of Alexandria, he comes to the fore. He's a young guy, he's in his 30s, and he puts up his hand and he says, look, this is rubbish. He says, we need to hold on to the Incarnation, we need to hold on to Orthodox Christianity, we cannot go on this route. And a bit of an ugly fist fight happens. I think the next photo, next slide, might be a photo of him, well, whenever that next slide appears. He was rather unflatteringly called the Black Dwarf, okay, the Black Dwarf. He was probably darker than that, because remember, Alexandria, this is North Africa, this is a North African, so our continent represented as well in the 4th century. He was very short, nobody liked him, they called him, not nobody liked him, but the Arians definitely didn't like him, and they called him the Black Dwarf. The Black Dwarf puts up his black little finger and says, look, I don't like what's happening here, and he questions Arianism. Now, these guys obviously don't like it, and they start a smearing campaign. And they say, look, this guy in Alexandria, this new bishop of Alexandria, the Black Dwarf, he actually dabbles in black magic, emperor. And Alexandria is a very important place, he's a very important figure there, we need to get rid of this guy. And they bring a bogus claim that through his dark magics and dark arts and whatever, he killed a prominent figure in then Alexandria. They say they killed him, and look, here's the evidence. Here's the hand, the severed hand of the guy he killed. Okay? Sort of a weird way of proving this, but they take the hand to Constantine. Constantine says, okay, well, look, he needs to be tried, and he's tried at Tyre, I think it is in modern day Lebanon. So now Athanasius needs to go there. But his followers, they catch wind of the fact that this guy who's reportedly killed is just hiding in the desert. They bribed him to get away for a while so that they can get rid of Athanasius. But this is just part of an elaborate scheme. Athanasius finds him, smuggles him to the courtroom. The courtroom is full of Arianist supporters. They are very optimistic about getting rid of the Black Dwarf. And they bring the allegation against him, this guy is a sorcerer, he's a heretic, and he's a murderer. And they bring the hand, the severed hand, shows it to everyone. At that stage, Athanasius is able to bring his defense. He walks up and he says, I would like to present Exhibit 1, which is the guy that I've purportedly killed. He comes in with a hooded. This should be turned into a movie, by the way. Those of you who are taking notes. He there's this slow reveal, and there's gasp in the room. Oh, he's alive. And then Athanasius, he had a very naughty sense of humor. He says, "Sir, can you please reveal your left hand?" He reveals his left hand, it's still there. "Sir, can you please reveal your right hand?" He reveals his right hand, it's still there. "Can you please show us the mark where the third hand was severed, so that we can just show the courtroom? Where is the place, the scar of where the third hand was cut off?" He makes a mockery of his opponents. And Athanasius, his popularity grows. He goes back to Alexandria. He goes on being a bishop over there. But the Arians do not stop there. They devise a new strategy, and it's a much better strategy. They convince Constantine that he is telling the people of Egypt to withhold the grain shipments so that cannot go into the rest of the Roman Empire. Now, if the Roman Empire does not have grain, that is the end of the Roman Empire. Constantine doesn't even need a trial for this. He just instantly banishes Athanasius. He just says, enough is enough. You are in house arrest in modern-day France, which doesn't sound like a bad deal. But at that stage, that's not necessarily what Athanasius wanted. He didn't want to go into Bordeaux for a wine tour. He wanted to be in Alexandria. He's banished there under house arrest. Now, what happens then? So, sorry if this history lesson is a little bit overbearing. Is that a correct word? Constantine dies, and the empire is divided into three and given to his three sons, who are all called variations of Constantine. I'm not correct, but it's like Constantinus, Constantine the First, and Constantana. So it's quite bizarre. It must have been a difficult household to run. And because of this, he's allowed to go back to Alexandria to do his thing. But shortly after that, well, what happens now is the Arians, the guys who fight against the divinity of Jesus, they took hold. They became very powerful whilst Athanasius was away. So at that stage, the churches in Alexandria did not believe in the divinity of Christ. But now, Athanasius is coming back and everybody's waiting. What's he going to do? What's he going to do? He's going to be angry. The black wolf is going to come. And his response is, mercy. Let's have mercy. I would like to bring you guys back in. What you guys believe is heretical, but I would like to bring you guys back in. The story doesn't end there. That would be a nice story. But Athanasius was, in his life, banned about 5 times. Went into exile. He traveled a lot against his will. And every time he came back, he preached the message. Lots of different enemies that sort of took aim at him. The last one was Julian the Apostate. So now, it's not just a heretical thing. Julian the Apostate was the last pagan ruler of Rome, or of the Roman Empire, and he tried to convert the Roman Empire back to paganism. Athanasius is at that stage the most famous Christian defender of the faith. He doesn't like him. So Athanasius had a very tough time. And if you look at his whole story and how he stood firm in the faith, there became a very famous dictum emerged. And it's famous to this day. It is called Athanasius contra mundum. Athanasius contra mundum, which means Athanasius against the world. Athanasius against the world. Because they really tried to get rid of him. They really tried to suppress his ideas. And they struggled and they didn't succeed. Now, here's the thing. Why was Athanasius such a strong defender of the divinity of Jesus, of him being equal with God? Why did he go through all of this to remain true to Orthodox Christianity? That is a good question to ask. Before I ask that question, though, I would like to just spend a little bit more time with the question, why did the Arians not believe in the divinity of Jesus? Why do modern-day Jews or Muslims find the idea, or Jehovah's Witnesses find the idea absurd? And the reason is this, and I hope you guys are listening for this. This is the one reason why they cannot believe in the Incarnation. Because it is stupid. Because it is stupid. I have a lot of sympathy for these people. For the Arians, for anybody who struggles with the idea that God, the transcendent God, takes flesh and he incarnates him and he's a man walking on earth, and that is God. I understand how people can look at it and say it's absurd. We have romanticized the idea of Christmas. There's Jesus in his baby manger, and we all snuggle up against fireplaces predominantly because we watch American television. In the meantime, it's summer and it's boiling hot here, but we like the cozy idea of Christmas, and we also have all the decorations next to the fireplaces that we never use. And we've got this nativity scene of Jesus in the manger, and it's cute, it's cuddly, it's beautiful. We like it, but we miss something, and that is this. It's absurd. We need to make it strange again. If you lived 2,000 years ago, the implication is that if you went to Bethlehem and you happened to follow a bunch of shepherds and a few wise men to this place, you would have been able to hold the God of the universe in your arms. Can you see that that is a bizarre claim? And I can understand why people struggle to make sense of that. I can understand why people today struggle to make sense of this claim. When we talk about incarnation, some of you guys ask me, what is the title of your talk, The Absurdity of the Incarnation? I thought I'm going to talk about prison systems and why we should abandon them. It's not incarceration. The incarnation we get from the same word that we use for carnivore. That animal is a carnivore. That car, it's flesh. So incarnation means enfleshment, going into the flesh. But can you see how it's a bit of a dirty word when we say that person is so carnal? It means he's so in his flesh. And in those days, as today, we see something in this flesh as there's something not entirely divine about this whole process. There's something very carnal. So the incarnation, and to think that this is God, it was a stretch, and it is a stretch for many people. And I think we have to have a little bit of sympathy why these guys try to make Christianity more understandable by getting rid of the idea that Jesus was divine. Also think about it a little bit more. How does God speak? How did he speak in the Old Testament? You know, when he speaks through a fire, that makes sense. That seems like a very godly thing to do. I am speaking through the fire. You know, fire, that seems godly. Or I am this mighty cloud. Or God is in the waves that crushes the Egyptian armies. Not God is a little baby hanging out with animals in Bethlehem. That does not make a lot of sense. Paul tried to defend this notion. He tried to defend the idea that Jesus was divine. And he talks a little bit about this in Colossians 1:15-20. He says this: He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. For by him all things were created, in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible. Whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities, all things were created through him and for him. And he is before all things, and in him all things hold together. And he is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, that in everything he might be preeminent. For in him all the fullness of God was pleased to dwell, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether on earth or in heaven, making peace by the blood of his cross. Now again, we've heard Christianese for our whole lives. If you live in Pretoria, you've been exposed to Christianese somewhere. So this doesn't really have an effect on us. But Paul is trying to say, look, the invisible God, when we saw Jesus, we actually saw God. Now, he would have lost most of the Jews in the audience by then. Look, it doesn't make sense. He might have had a few pagans. Because remember, within Greek mythology, they've got stories of Hercules and Zeus. So they would have said, okay, yeah, this makes sense. It's like the Hercules guy. Okay, I'll hear you out. God, man, I've got a bit of a framework. The Jews would have said, it's crazy, but the pagans might have been with him. And then he goes on, and he says, who is this God? Well, he is the image of the invisible God, uncreated. He has dominion over everything, and he was dead. What? I mean, I get he's got the authority over dominions, I get that he's invisible, I get the fact that he existed before all things, but now you want to tell me that this invisible God died. I mean, come on, Hercules doesn't die. He doesn't die on the cross, he's got muscles, he's strong, he wins. That's how the movie ends. You can't tell me that this guy dies. Paul goes on, he says, he brings all things, he reconciles all things, making peace by the blood of his cross. The cross! Now I'm getting cross because it's just stupid. As a matter of fact, in polite company, you weren't allowed to use the word cross. So the term crucifixion, where we get lots of words from it, like excruciating. Excruciating. A Roman citizen wasn't allowed to be crucified. They weren't even allowed to talk about the cross. Now you want to tell me the invisible God took on flesh. It's a stretch, but I'm willing to listen to you. And now you tell me he dies on a cross. That's the way that we kill rebels. That's the way we kill people who are foolish and not very good soldiers or not very good leaders. That's game over right there. But this is the message that Paul preaches. What is Paul's response to all of this? 1 Corinthians 1:23. But we preach Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews and folly to Gentiles. He didn't budge. I know this sounds stupid. Athanasius, he didn't budge. I know this sounds like folly. I know this sounds like a stumbling block. But this is what happened. We preach God and Him crucified. I've used this analogy many times with this example, but if you go to Rome today, you can look at ancient graffiti. And I find ancient graffiti very funny because a graffiti artist had to go with a hammer and you call it a chisel. I almost used a Chris and used with a bittle. But it's a chisel, a hammer and a chisel. So you had to be a very committed vandalist. If you went there, you can't just spray paint. You have to go there and you have to do this whole thing. And, you know, it must have been quite a process. But we've got graffiti, and the graffiti is a donkey hanging on a cross like this, and another guy, it's like a stickman figure, who is bowing down to him, and there's this subtext that says, here is, let's call him Athanasius, I forget the guy's name, worshipping his God. They are mocking Christians because their gods, it doesn't look Hercules with the six-pack, it's not Zeus with the eight-pack, it's not another god with also good abs, it's a guy hanging on the cross. And they just thought it's absurd. So here is this new Christian that we met, he's my friend, I want to mock him, I'm going to do a bit of graffiti, he's worshipping his God. How stupid. But this is the message that Paul preached, and he didn't budge. Why would you defend that? Why would Athanasius defend this? Why would Paul defend the Incarnation? Here's, I think, one of the reasons. If the story is true, ladies and gentlemen, it changes everything. If the story of the Incarnation is true, it changes everything. And this is one way to make sense of it. In Philippians 2, we read this. This is a very famous passage. Paul says, do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourself. Let each of you look not only to his own interest, but also to the interest of others. Have this mind among yourself, which is yours in Christ Jesus, who, though he was in the form of God, did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself by taking the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men, and being found in human form. He humbled himself by becoming obedient. The story is true, and it changes everything. Let me try and help us make sense of it. There's a story, another story, a phrase that says, God became man so that man can become God. Now don't get hung up in, we're going to be gods, and this is a new age church with a tint of Mormonism. That's not what I'm saying. But there's something very real in God becoming man so that he can lift us up, so that he can make us at least godly. All right? That is the Christian message, summed up, I think, quite well. But here's the thing. When he lifts us up, that whole process is suffering. And if you want to lift someone up, that process will be suffering. We are called to imitate God. We are called to imitate Jesus. He is the one who comes down into our world and lifts us up. And here's the thing. If you want to lift anything or anyone up, then you have to stoop down. That's how it works. If I'm not sure if you've got any kindergarten teachers here or primary school teachers, but if you teach mathematics to grade 4s or whatever, then I'm assuming the type of language that you use is very simple language. I've seen good teachers, they will stoop down, and I don't mean this in a condescending way. I know we're so afraid of being condescending, but they go down and they would say, hello, Kanerkis. They all speak Afrikaans. That's one of the rules. Hallo kindertjies, vandag gaan ons hierdie doen. Today we're going to do this. And can you tell me what is that? No, I mean, why can't they just be smart like the teacher? The answer is the teacher needs to lift them up. She needs to stoop down. She needs to speak 9-year-old so that she can get the 9-year-olds to 10-year-old level. And then the next teacher has to speak 10-year-old to lift a person up. That's how it works. You stoop down to lift someone or something up. When you're driving and you see there's a guy with a flat wheel, there's something wrong with his car. By stopping, you are stooping down. You are walking away from the world of movement, from the world of mobility, and you are stopping, you are losing your time, you are offering a lot to help this guy get on the same level of movement. In the same way that the teacher tries to get the girl or the boys on the same level as her eventually, or as adults. Likewise, when you stop and you help a guy, you're trying to get him back, you're trying to pull him into the world of mobility. The analogy that makes a lot of sense to me. You guys remember a while ago, there was a dog that fell in the hole at Kimberley, the big hole at Kimberley. Anybody remember that story? Okay, let me tell you that story. First of all, let me show you this. This is a blank screen. It's very blank, but soon there's supposed to be a picture of the hole of Kimberley. That thing is, I think it is the biggest man-made hole in the world. It's really big. And when people came there we go. This is the hole of Kimberley. And when people looked down, they saw there's something swimming down there. So you go there to look at the big hole, and then you realize, wow, there's some wildlife down there. So if you're a tourist, you're like, wow, in Africa, they really mix their historical and natural sites. And then people decided, look, we need to rescue this dog, or we're just going to watch this dog die because there's no way for him out there. It's a miracle that he survived. How did he get in there in the first place? I mean, that's why we've got that famous phrase, right? That a dog has 9 lives. Right? So he took it away from other species. But the fact that he survived is a miracle. So what happens now? There's a rescue mission. That guy over there, they built this whole machine and they set it up so that this guy can stoop low into the hole to go and fetch this dog. What do you think, before we do that, before we've got our moment, what happens when that guy is there? Is that dog very happy to see him? No, he is not. What happened, when that guy is down in the hole, he was swimming around in the hole because the dog was swimming away from him the whole time. Then the dog would stand on the side somewhere, and then he would go there, and then the dog would run away and then dive in and swim. So you had this paramedic guy chasing a dog in the big hole for half a day. Eventually, he managed to get hold of the dog. That dog was not very happy to be hugged at that stage. That dog is scared. That dog is pouring himself into this medic. He is paranoid. He is scared. He is flustered. He is now he's being pulled up. He's in mid-air now. And he remembered when he did that a couple of hours ago, it wasn't that fun. So he doesn't like being in the air again. And he is fighting. He cannot make sense of it. And eventually, this dog is on the same level. And now we can go to that picture. The dog, thank you. The dog is safe. But you know what? That guy who went down there to rescue that dog, as he is standing there, he smells like wet dog. Okay? He smells like wet dog. He spent most of his day chasing a dog in a historical setting. He's got scratch marks all over him because this dog panicked. Now, he's there. But here's the analogy. In the same way that this guy stooped down, this is a brilliant metaphor for the Incarnation. Jesus stoops down. God enters mankind. He comes down. And we can't make sense of it. That's why we scratch. That's why we go crazy. We can't make sense of this guy trying to help us. That's why we crucify it. the guy who's trying to save us. We go berserk. And what this guy is doing is he brings this dog to, quite literally, to his level. He lifts him up, quite literally. That is the story, friends, of the Incarnation. Throughout the Old Testament, we see God trying to communicate with people. And you know what are our reaction when we meet God? It's usually, we're scared because it's an angel. Or he needs to, I don't know, distribute Prozac before he can say something because the people are so afraid of what's going on now. And then after a while, you can say, take your time, okay, you're awake now, welcome. So this is what I want you to do. I'm God, by the way. And this is, he couldn't connect with us. And you know why? Because God is too big. This man coming down with this robe is too big for that dog to understand that this guy is trying to save him. When I go to a fish tank and I see a little fish there and I'm like, I greet the fish or I'm trying to look at him, the fish swims away. Why? Because I'm too big. I'm too big for that fish to make sense of me. So he hides. So for me, and forgive me if this is a silly analogy, but for me to really communicate to the fish, if I really want to give them a good tip about what's going to happen soon and what I want them to do, I need to become a fish and I need to speak fish. Because in that way, I'm not too big for them to understand. This sounds silly. You become fish. The gap between me and the fish and God and mankind, this is way bigger. That's why it's so foolish that God took on flesh. But it's the only way that we could see him and hear him, even though we scratched him, even though we killed him. Why? Because he wanted to bring us back. He wanted to bring us in. This was a rescue mission on a cosmic level. This is Saving Private Ryan on steroids. And he did this to reconcile us to him and us to each other. So that photo that you have over there, that is a photo of reconciliation. That dog is now on the same level where there's dog food and vets and places to do dog things. He's reconciled with that world. That is what Jesus did, what God did in the Incarnation. He came to fetch us. He came to save us. Now, if that is true, if that story of the Incarnation is true, the implication of that is that he calls us to imitate him. And he calls us to reconcile people to him and to each other. And if there's one message of Christmas, and I'm sorry my Christmas message is about 3 or 4 weeks late, but if there's one message of Christmas, although we made Jesus very cozy in our nativity scenes, it means this: God is not interested in a comfort zone at all. He leaves, remember Philippians, he leaves his heavenly glory, his heavenly dwelling. He comes on this rescue mission. He takes on flesh. He saves us. Yes, he is so obedient, he goes to the cross, all in an attempt to bring us in, all in an attempt to save us from this hole of sin. Now, today, and yesterday, this weekend actually, was one of the worst weekends that I've had for a while. We've got very good friends in Matatial in the Eastern Cape. And I told the cell group, and I might have bored some of you with this as well, but these guys are just doing amazing work in reconciliation. They adopt foster children, they help foster children. They are doing amazing work in terms of land reform. Their school is such a success story of integration and good relationships. They live incredibly intentional lives. And yesterday, actually on Friday, the guy phones me, because after the Schweizer story, you guys are familiar with the Schweizer story, I phoned this guy and I said, I must actually come down with the camera so that we can tell King Edward's story. because that is the story of how it can work, black and white working together. And my WhatsApp that I sent him wasn't even called. Then the Sunday Times phoned him and they said they're going to run a story. And today on the front page of the Sunday Times is the story of apartheid school in the Eastern Cape. And I thought to myself, geez, I could have showed them so many racist schools. They should have just phoned me. I even phoned the journalist before he printed it. I said, dude, I'll help you to get a good story of racism, but you've got the wrong school. They are not doing that kind of thing. They are 80% black, for crying in a bucket. What they did with their white kids in that community is they said, guys, do not send your kids to Maritzburg College. Do not send your kids to Glenwood. We're going to stay here. This white flight is nonsense. We're going to make it work. We're going to coexist. We're going to make the school great. And it's a shining example. If you look at the brilliant Pulsar rugby team, it's just a beautiful story. And the Sunday Times come with this article of apartheid at the school. And I phoned Andrew, who's my friend there, and he's also head of the governing body, so he's quoted in the article, and he obviously doesn't come off well in the article. And I asked him what now. He says, well, the EFF is going to protest tomorrow, and the MEC for Education in Eastern Cape will be there, and it will be a big fight. And this year, being election year, I've sort of dedicated myself to really try and tell good news to South Africa, to try and say that we cannot be held hostage by all the negativity and these half-baked stories that the media tells us. And we need to get white and black people together. And over this weekend, when I saw this story and when I just heard of how they really unfairly treated this community and these people, for a moment I thought to myself, I'm out. I wanted to, phone Afriforum or Suidlanders or somebody to say, or the immigration office. I just thought I'm out. This is, because it's probably the best damn story in South Africa what those guys are doing. Living so selflessly. And they are being made this apartheid school, this apartheid community. And I thought it was I thought it was so unfair. And then today, we feel so helpless, and Lorraine and I, we go on Facebook to solve our country's problems. We go on Sunday Times and we try to say, this is really not what's going on. There are beautiful stories. The head boy is the son of Andrew Dumini, the former head of the governing body. He's dating the head girl, who's a Xhosa girl. And the head girl, one Afrikaans, one Xhosa. And this is the racist apartheid school. And we're trying to argue this on Facebook. And if you want to do that, don't. Because in a very short while, Lorraine and myself, we were called all sorts of names. Are you just defending this? And you are a racist bigot, and all of these things. And it was sad. But then I had to prepare for the sermon. I forgot that's actually my job. I need to do this. And I looked at this passage. Maybe just go back to the one Colossians passage again. I think you went too far. Yeah, there we go. And I looked at this, and I just saw again, it was as if I was just preaching to myself. This is what Jesus did to you, for you at least, to be reconciled to you. This is what he did. And now are you going to allow some news agency to allow these evil thoughts to come into your heart, to not try and, what I think is at least a noble attempt to try and reconcile South Africans together? Are you going to allow this? Given this message, that this is what God did, given this message, are you not going to do this? And I felt so convicted. You're a wuss, man. Read your Bible. And when you try to fetch people and say, guys, this is actually a good story, or we should actually be reconciled, you will be called all sorts of names. They will. There's a lot of hatred. There's a lot of confusion. There's a lot of anger. There's a lot of pain out there. And if you are going to try and bring people in, then people are going to scratch and people are going to scream. But this is the meta message that I am supposed to base my life on. This is the incarnation. So I'm a hypocrite. But I say, oh, this is so beautiful here. But when it applies to me and God says, you want to imitate me, I'm sending you on a mission, reconcile people together, I don't. I don't be honest. If I could do this for you, then surely you can do it for a couple of people who don't like you at this moment. And I did not plan that. But if this message is true, then Athanasius can go through what he went through. If this message is true, then Paul and all the disciples, they can go through that. And so can we. God doesn't call us for comfort. He doesn't call us to live in a nice Waterkloof mansion and to be cozy. That's not the story of Christmas. The story of Christmas is God in a manger in a filthy place called Bethlehem. If you go there today, it still sucks. It sucked back then until it's a dirty place. That is God. He doesn't hold on to his splendor. And well, I think, oh, maybe I must go to Europe or Australia or whatever. Maybe that'll be easier. Maybe that will be cozier. But yes, that is not what God called us to do. He doesn't call us to comfort. He called us to go in there and reconcile. Do whatever it takes. Imitate me. In Hebrews 12, verse 2, we read this. This is why Jesus did it. He said, looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. If you can just think for a moment of the beauty that is reconciliation, to be reconciled to your brother, to be reconciled to God. That is so beautiful, that if you have to go through the cross, then so be it. Jesus went through the cross. Why? Because of the joy that was set before him. There's a wonderful story to be told in this country, I'm sure of it. But if it means that we have to go through a bit of crucifixion, we're in good company, at least. I think of a guy like Martin Luther King. He stooped low to get a bunch of racist Americans in. He wanted to bring them back in. He showed so much grace, so much kindness. When I think of the story of God coming into this world, bringing us back in, if that story is true, then we are called on a mission. Not for comfort, but for a mission. It means that we need to incarnate other people's worlds and bring them in. And our so-called comfort and heavenly glory does not matter, because we've got a glorious mission that we need to be part of. Let me pray for us. Yeah, Lord Jesus, we realize that we so easily get discouraged in this country. We so easily want to opt out. And we likewise so easily make your story of the crucifixion, your story of Christmas coming into this world and saving us, we tame it, Lord. We make it easy because it's familiar to us. But I pray, Lord, that we can rescue it from familiarity and just see the rawness in it. Just see the adventure in it. Just see the incredible sense of mission that is within that story. And help us, Lord, to look at it and to look at you. To look at Jesus for so long that we get captured by the beauty of that. And help us, Lord, to be inspired to do the same. If you call us to serve people or to try and bring your message and bring reconciliation, even if it comes with scratches and kicks and accusations and whatever, help us to not pity ourselves, to not feel sorry for ourselves, but to think of what we read in Hebrews 12, that we can endure all of this because of the joy that is set before us. Help us to be captivated by the joy of the whole universe being reconciled to you. The universe groans and moans for that moment. And for some reason, Lord, you allow us to be partakers in that. You allow us to bring them in, to bring each other in. Thank you for what you did on the cross. Lord, we especially pray for this country that's so divided with an ugly history. And we repent of that ugly history, Lord, and we desperately want to see a good future for this country. And all the good work that we do can be taken away with one stupid social media remark or some stupid action from various people, whether white or black or anything in between, Lord. But we pray that you will miraculously help this country to be reconciled to each other. We pray for our country. We pray for our leaders. We even pray for the media, Lord, that there will be a sense of responsibility to be bringers of good news. And help us to be bringers of the good news and to not stop, even when it doesn't look pretty, but to continue to bring the good news. We pray all of this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. Okie dokie. So you guys are welcome to grab yourself a cup of coffee or a bit of water. As a matter of fact, because if we can find our Nick, then we can start to take the snob's orders and do a bit of coffee. And Chris actually offered that he will pay for it. So if you want a piece of cake with it, then please help yourself. And then if you've got any comment or question you want to disagree or just add on, there's a microphone, so just help yourself.
Awesome, thanks, Sean. I'm just wondering, considering Paul saying that it is a stumbling block to Jews and folly to Gentiles, what was the strategy that Paul and Peter and the early disciples used to get these people on board about this message of, this absurd message of a God who was willing to become human?
Usually I like to take a few questions, but let me answer you. The strategy was the resurrection. That was the strategy. Paul and all of these disciples, and this is what, if you are just a historian that looks at the first century, then you will know that the followers of Jesus all ran away. The movement died. In the time of Jesus, he wasn't the first guy to claim to be the Messiah. He wasn't the last guy to claim to be the Messiah. You've got Simon bar Kokhba. You've got so many guys who had movements, who had disciples, who claimed to be the Messiah. And then Rome catches them, they are killed. And you know what happens then? Nothing. They're killed. If you happen to be a Simon bar Kokhba follower, you know what you did? Is you say, who else is claiming to be Messiah these days? Let me go check that out. Or you say, I think this Messiah idea is a little bit bogus, and it's not working out for me, so I'm not going to buy into that sort of theology anymore. Those were your two options. You either get a new Messiah, or you give up on the whole idea. Jesus, one of many messianic pretenders, and he dies, that's the end of it. It's not the first time they had to deal with a guy like this, and it won't be the last time. But now his followers start to say, he rose from the dead. And they turn from these scared, like I said, Prozac drinking followers of Jesus into this fearless missionary society, the most fearless and most effective missionary society the world has ever seen. And with the exception of John, they all die a martyr's death. And even if you're a skeptic of Jesus' resurrection, you have to ask yourself the question, how did that happen? How did these people just turn miraculously like this? You've got a guy like Paul. Paul, he is persecuting the Christians. He is a Jew of Jews. He is as monotheistic Jew as can be. He has this encounter with the risen Lord. It is miraculous enough. He goes to the disciples, and they are a little bit cautious of inviting them into their homes because he used to be a very good killer. And he says, look, I just want to match our theology, and it sees that it corresponds, and they start to preach this message in the face of fierce opposition. They had no preconceived idea of the resurrection. They had a theology of the resurrection, but they thought it would happen at the end of time. So remember when Jesus goes to Lazarus, and he's got this conversation with Martha and Mary, and then everybody's crying, and he says, relax, he will rise. And then she says, I know he will rise. You know, I know he will rise at the end of time, at the end of days, but he's pretty dead now. And Jesus says, no, he's going to rise now. And the reason why they didn't expect that is because they didn't have that sort of expectation of a resurrection in the middle of history. No Jew expected that. So if you want to account for the resurrection, if you want to make sense of it, you need to ask yourself this question. This was pretty much the prologue of my talk tonight. You have to ask yourself the question, how did these fierce monotheistic Jews, how did they go from this to claiming that Jesus is what he is God and he rose from the dead? The only, I think, reasonable explanation for that is they had a massive encounter with the resurrected Jesus. And then they had to make sense of the theology in reverse. Then they had to do it. And you can see something of that in Luke 24, where he's walking with the Emmaus disciples, and they're walking, and then Jesus walks with them, which is quite bizarre. He just rose from the dead. That's a pretty big thing. And what does he do? He just walks with this couple away from Jerusalem. It's quite bizarre. And he asked them, so what's going on? He says, no, we're a little bit depressed because we followed this Messiah, and he was killed by Rome. And I mean, that's never good. And now some of our people say that he's risen from the dead. It doesn't make any sense. And Jesus then, we read then, and Jesus said, how slow are you guys? Did you not see that all of the prophets and all of Moses pointed to this thing? So they had to understand, all of a sudden they had to adapt their theology. Oh, this is what it meant. Oh, this is what it meant. But the way they understood the Old Testament, or at least the Hebrew Scriptures up until that point, was not to expect any of this. That's why these guys were as surprised as everyone else. Like, look, I didn't expect this, but this is what happened. It's the resurrection. And that's why the whole Christian story stands or falls on the resurrection. Easy as that. Go for it.
So I just wanted to add something as well on perhaps the deity of Christ, because if you look at the Torah that they're referring to, like Genesis is part of that, like the 5 first books, and in Genesis 1 verse 26, when God made mankind, He said, then God said, let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the bird in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground. So that was pretty cool to me as well. Maybe just like an add-on referring to the deity. I mean, it's not a direct reference to Jesus, but I mean, that kind of language shows us that God already stated that He wasn't alone. You know, and if you look at like John, Daniel said, it can also refer to that. Yeah.
Look, there are many instances of God claiming divinity. My favorite one is the fact that He forgave sins. When you forgive sins, you are claiming to be God. So when you bump my car, you borrow my car, you bump my car, and you come to me and I say, don't worry about it, you're forgiven. But let's say, that makes sense. But let's say you bump my car, and then Chris goes to you and says, don't worry about it, Marcus, you're forgiven. Then I'll say, Chris, shut up. You've got no jurisdiction. He sinned against me. It's my car. I have the damages. So now the Jews realize that they sin towards God. They did not sin towards some man. And then Jesus says, I forgive you. And then I say, whoa, only God can forgive sins. Man cannot forgive sins. And he says, yes, I agree with you, and I forgive you. I said, whoa, you're not hearing me right. I said, only God can forgive sins. Man cannot forgive sins. You cannot forgive. He says, I agree with your theology. Only God can forgive sins. I forgive you. Now, I mean, what is he claiming? Divinity, right there. In terms of the Genesis passage, I'm not quite, I'd like to think that the Trinity is visible there. I think the Trinity is visible in other images within Genesis 1 and 2, but at least Genesis 1. But I think what a lot of people would say is that we, us, in the beginning of Genesis is the royal we. So if you visit famous people like Jock, who's a gereformeerde predikant, then and they welcome you in their house, the way that they would speak, some of these royals would say, we welcome you. And you look around, you see, well, there's only this one guy. That's what they call the royal we. If you're really, really famous and fancy, then you're allowed to use a plural to refer to yourself. So a lot of people would say that that's what's happening there. So I don't think that is necessarily the best argument we have in terms of this in the Old Testament. But I am curious about the Trinitarian images in the Old Testament.
Thanks, John. I think also to add on to Lawrence's question about the strategy, what struck me is as soon as those guys actually claimed and believed in the resurrection, they started following the same strategy that Jesus did by incarnating. I mean, that's what Paul did as well. He would say, for the Jews I became a Jew, for the Greeks I became a Greek, so that some might come to Christ. And I think there's a key to incarnate into people's lives to bring reconciliation. We can't start standing aside and say, listen, you do your thing, and I'm preaching from the side. We actually have to climb into people's lives and do that.
Exactly.
Just something.
No. I mean, that's very important, and that's pretty much the message. So if you look at missions that worked historically and today, is the guy who went on mission in China, Hudson Taylor. Somebody just confirm. Okay, you look smart enough, so I'm going to go with it. Hudson Taylor is this missionary, English missionary who went to China, and he cut his hair, Chinese style, learned the language, learned the mannerisms, and he was one of few success stories in the Far East where Christian mission wasn't very successful. He was successful because he really climbed into their world. And that's what Jesus calls us to do. So if this is the biggest thing that ever happened, and this is God climbing into our world in the person of Jesus, then that is the biggest thing. And everything else is actually okay. So that means my culture can be fluid. I can be fluid in my culture or anything else, as long as I can bring people in. And so it's an incredible motivation for Christian mission, and that, by the way, is the reason why, if you look at Christianity, let's look at Islam. Islam's center historically was Mecca in Saudi Arabia. What's its center today? Mecca, Saudi Arabia. Well done. If you look at Buddhism's center or Hinduism center, where's the center? It's still the Far East, as it was when it originated. Where's Christianity's center? I'm not sure where it is. Started out in Jerusalem for a while, then it managed to conquer Rome, managed to conquer North Africa, Turkey. Today that place is entirely Muslim. Then it was Europe for a while. Today, if you find a Christian in Europe, you take a photo of him. It's an endangered species. Then it moved to North America. North America is now fading. Where are the most Christians in the world now? In the south of Africa. This is becoming the new center of Christianity. And it shifts. And why does it shift? Because Jesus is a moving God. He moves. And we are called to do the same. We shouldn't hang on to things that we think this is so important. Within Christianity, it might be nice, it might be cute, but it's not an absolute. So it's crucially important. Thanks, Chris. I'm gonna stop there because I feel like I've kept you guys for long enough. Let me just say that of all the crowds that I've spoken in front of, and I've done this quite a bit, you guys are without a doubt the most recent. And I also want to say that that was funnier in a different setting. And there is coffee, so if you guys want to help yourself to some coffee, you guys are welcome. And then if you want to know a little bit more about the Allure and what we're up to, come and talk to me or come and talk to Chris.